into the Why You're Wrong Fantasy Football Podcast. Today we're doing a 10-team double flex full PPR mock draft today, and this is because sometimes you'll find yourself in a league that's doing something that's not actually a standard league. You might be doing full PPR, you might be throwing in extra flex, you might be throwing in a super flex. So this one is an additional flex piece to the original standard roster, and in this flex piece you can only do a wide receiver or a tight end, because if you throw in an extra running back, there's going to be not enough running backs to go around that would be efficient. So adding in the extra wide receiver just allows for teams to score more points. It doesn't mean that you need to know a few extra players down the line when you're doing your drafts. So getting into this episode, if this looks a little different than our normal setup, it's because it completely is. If you're watching on YouTube right now, I am in the garage of my grandparents' house because I'm in the middle of moving. Brian and John are both busy with work, so this was the best bet for this week's episode. But you can still find us and listen to us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or you can find us on social media. We mainly use Instagram, but we also have TikTok and Twitter. So on TikTok and Instagram, we are Why You're Wrong FFB, and we're on Twitter as You're Wrong FFB. But to just get in some impactful news, there's a few stories out there that I had some time to just kind of dig up and talk about. The first one is Dak Prescott has been on limited snaps due to his injury to his throwing shoulder. Now this is significant because he's coming off a major ankle injury. He just got this shoulder injury in camp. We know what Dak Prescott can do when he's fully healthy, but if he's coming in, he's got limited mobility now because he's probably going to be a little wary of his ankle injury, probably won't risk it as much. And now he's got an injury to his throwing shoulder. I know everyone's super excited about Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb this year for passing weapons, but I don't know if I want to still select Dak Prescott as my quarterback in the rounds that he's going in, just because it's bad drafting a player who's starting the year hurt, because if he aggravates it some more, you're losing a high-end player or someone that you could have taken in that rounds that wasn't hurt. Now you took someone who was hurt, and if he gets more hurt, then you're losing a 4th, 5th, or 6th round draft pick on a guy that you believed in. And now you have a giant hole in your roster spot because you took a quarterback early, which makes you especially more weak at wide receiver or running backs. Also, the Saints and Broncos quarterback positions, their battles are still undecided. They think that the Broncos QB could be decided after the Seahawks preseason game. So right now you are deciding between Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater. And then the Saints are still undecided. Both Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston had ups and downs during their first preseason game. So they still haven't decided on that one either. For a lot of fantasy people out there, it's better for the wide receivers for Jameis Winston to start because we know he's going to throw some interceptions, which means they're going to be down, which means they're going to have to come back from behind, which means a lot more receiving work. With Taysom Hill at the quarterback last year, I think you're going to expect more points for Taysom Hill as a fantasy player, but less points to go around for the other fantasy options on the team, because last year during the 4-game span where we saw Taysom Hill start, basically just focused in on Michael Thomas as a one wide receiving option and then took off with his legs or gave it the ball to Kamara or Latavius Murray. So if Taysom Hill is the starter, I don't think we're going to see as high of a receiving volume as we'd see if Jameis Winston was the starter. Some more news is Mike Williams, Chargers wide receiver, a lot of hype around him this offseason about becoming the X wide receiver, is dealing with a hip flexor injury in camp. So if he misses time during the year, I think you're going to see an increased amount of targets to Jared Cook, the tight end who's new coming into the system, replacing Hunter Henry. Keenan Allen's going to see even more targets, which he already has a ton of targets to begin with. And then a lot of vacated targets often go to the running back, which means even more targets for the receiving back Austin Eckler. Saints wide receiver Kevin White is now on the team. So if you remember Kevin White, he was a first-round draft pick by Chicago, busted, was basically useless, bounced around practice squads, and has been brought back into the league by the Saints because they've also now just lost Tre'Quan Smith. So losing the first 2 wide receivers in Michael Thomas and Tre'Quan Smith, the Saints only have one true guy left on their team. And I think you guys know who that is Adam Big Mouth Troutman. It is now fishing season in New Orleans. If you want to go late tight end strategy, Adam Troutman might be the diamond in the rough. I think he's going to be the equivalent to Blake Jarwin hype of last year, where he's one of the few guys in the room. He has all the athletic ability. Adam Troutman, as we've said numerous times, was the best blocking tight end last year, so he's going to be on every single snap on the offense, which means he could become the number 1 target in the offense. He's going to be on the field for every snap, which is just what you want when you're drafting a late tight end for fantasy football. Now to get into our mock draft, and I just need to switch over to Sleeper because Sleeper is honestly not a sponsor, but it's probably my favorite platform to just draft on because you don't have to wait for randos to join your lobby and then have randos basically troll your draft. It's very intelligent AI where you can knock out a draft specific to your league within 5 to 10 minutes. And if you don't like how it's going, you can exit out and start a brand new one. And then you can even bring in friends to draft, which you've seen us do multiple times on this show. So if you've heard a little bit of background noise, I am in the garage. So you have some workers outside working on the deck. You have some fan noise. You have some people walking around. So I can't guarantee it to be perfectly silent. But for our mock draft, since it's just me, I'm not going to pick a spot. I'm just going to let Sleeper decide where I'm drafting from as if we're doing an actual real life draft and I don't know where I'm going to be. And I'm just going to kind of leave my draft board on the screen because unfortunately I can't have the camera facing me just because of the setup that we've got right now. So I'm going to walk through my picks, talk about them, and since it's just me in the draft and the computer will be auto picking, I'm going to talk through all my picks to let you know where I'm at and why I went with them due to my team construction, and kind of talk about just anything I see on the board that's happening, just that you could be aware of it and just some things for you to think about while you're going through your drafts or doing your mock drafts as well. So I'm going to start the draft now, and it looks like Sleeper has given me the 4th pick. So we saw Dalvin Cook, Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara go off the board immediately. Now here's the biggest part about this next guy, because in a regular league or half PPR league, everyone would take Derrick Henry here without a second thought, but for me right now, it's really difficult because in a full PPR, you don't have the receiving work that you would hope to have with Derrick Henry, which makes for a really terrible decision because the next two guys on the board are Saquon Barkley and Jonathan Taylor, who are giant red flags to me. I really don't want either of them. But the hard part is it feels weird reaching for another player at this position. This is something I need to do more research on if I get into this hole to start off the bat. So I'm going to go with Derrick Henry, even though he gets no PPR work. If he does get the same workload as last year, he might be up there for a full PPR, but we're going to have to see what happens with this draft board. I'm really hoping that I can pair him with another really good running back, and the running back I really wanted to pair him with in a full PPR league is Austin Eckler, because Austin Eckler is going to get so much receiving work this year that he could easily balance out Derrick Henry in a full PPR, just because Eckler is probably going to see over 100 targets, and we know Derrick Henry is going to receive maybe 20 targets all year, so that would have had a nice balance to our attack. Now I'm staring at Stephon Diggs, who was basically a PPR master last year for wide receiver, but I'm very someone who likes to go really running back heavy. But with all these guys left on the board, there's going to be some sort of running back I will like back in the 3rd round. So I think because it's full PPR, I need to go with Stephon Diggs being the ultimate receiver in his team, and he's just going to see a ton of targets. And the running back I wanted to get back to me was Antonio Gibson. He unfortunately did not. If I'm in a situation where I don't have to take Derrick Henry, I would much rather take Antonio Gibson there with my 2nd pick. But I went with the Stephon Diggs just because I need someone who's going to get an absurd amount of targets and receptions this year, just to balance out the fact that Derrick Henry's not going to have any at all. So looking back at the guys available, I've got Justin Jefferson on the board. He could go wide receiver too. But I really want to make sure that I have full-on running backs. I want 2 elite running backs in my eyes. So I'm going to go with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He might not get all the carries this year, but there have been words that Patrick Mahomes and Clyde both want to give more receptions to the running back. He's the running back in the most productive offense in football. He's one of those picks this year that people either don't think he's going to do anything and could fall to like running back 20, or he has all the talent to break into the running back 5 or top 5 just because of the team he's on and the offense that he's in. Now that I'm back in the 4th round, we saw some more running backs. We saw Darren Waller go off the board. Some of the guys I could be looking at is David Montgomery. David Montgomery has a stigma around him where he's going exactly where he might finish if he has the same sort of season he did last year, if you don't include the breakout at the end. So if you went wide receiver heavy, David Montgomery's not a terrible RB2 in this round, but I really like the wide receivers around him right now. So on the board, I've got Julio Jones, got Amari Cooper, got Cooper Kupp, but Amari Cooper is currently dealing with an injury, even though Julio Jones is also dealing with a minor injury. Julio Jones has always had a minor injury his entire career the last few seasons, and since I'm going as wide receiver 2, I'm going to go with Julio Jones as my wide receiver 2 in the full PPR league, just because he's known to be the reception just monster in general. I think the defense will look at A.J. Brown on that team as the focal point of that offense, or Derrick Henry. So Julio Jones isn't going to see the type of coverage he's used to seeing over his career, which is going to make him super valuable, and I think in full PPR. Now back around on the board, I'm going to go with the breakout potential of CeeDee Lamb as my wide receiver 3. He's going to be someone that is going to explode. I love him as my wide receiver 2 in a half PPR, so I think having him as my wide receiver 3, going as my first flex position in a 10 full PPR, I think CeeDee Lamb's going to explode this season. Now in the 6th round, at this point in the league, or at this point in the draft, there's not a lot of big running backs left. I'm happy with the 2 I have up at the top. So since we have 2 flex positions to fill, I'm going to pick the best player that I think is going to have a great flex kind of season. Or with the recent news, I could be looking at TJ Hawkinson because he's going to gather all of the targets that he possibly could in the Lions offense. So late in the 6th round, I'm basically looking at Tyler Lockett, who finished as a top 10 wide receiver last year. I'm basically staring down Tyler Lockett or TJ Hawkinson. It's a hard choice because there are some tight ends in the back end of the draft that I now do like who could be more reception heavy this year than thought. So I think for this draft specifically, I'm going to go late tight end strategy. So I'm going to go with Tyler Lockett to throw in my second flex spot. Now going around the board, we saw Beckham, Deontay Johnson, Kareem Hunt, Brandon Ayuk, Justin Herbert, Michael Thomas go off the board. Now I'm back here, and the tight end I chose not to pick in the previous round has fallen back to me, so I think he is a steal at this point, especially in a full PPR league. I will take TJ Hawkinson here, just because he's going to have a monster season. There's no good pass catcher behind him in the Lions offense. So if you can get TJ Hawkinson in your draft this year, people project him as a top 5 tight end. I'm very excited for his season. So if I can find him on my team late in the 6th or 7th round, he's an automatic pick. But if you don't get TJ Hawkinson, I'll talk about the guys at the back end of the draft that you could be looking at. Now that we've gone back around, we saw a bunch of running backs go off the board. We're in the middle of the 8th round. We're looking at Juju Smith-Schuster, Noah Fant, Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Jalen Waddle. I haven't picked a quarterback yet because I'm going to go late quarterback strategy. So it's one of those things where Juju has this negative taste about him, or this negative thought where you've drafted him every single year, he's kind of disappointed you, but he's always had a great season. I'm just not huge on Big Ben. I don't really think Big Ben's going to be able to do it this year. I can easily see them just handing the ball to Najee 20 to 25 times a game instead of passing through the air like they did at the second half of last season. So I want to go with a guy who's a top 20 wide receiver with poor quarterback play. So I'm going with Courtland Sutton as my pick here in the 8th round. As you saw, we saw Tom Brady go off the board next, Deebo Samuel, Noah Fant, Juju, Jerry Jeudy, Jalen Waddle. So now I'm on the board. Here's a guy that I think is going to be huge for PPR. I've selected a bunch of wide receivers, but it's almost, I can't let him go off the board. I need to take Robbie Anderson right here. In his offense, Robbie Anderson is just a monster. They've turned him into a full PPR guy. He's going to have a great season. Unfortunately, because of that strategy, we saw Trey Sermon, Ronald Jones, Michael Carter, Damian Harris, Kenny Drake, A.J. Dillon go off the board. Now this is an issue because I really need a running back 3, and I really don't know who I'm going to be going with at this point, but I want to make sure that I can at least get the quarterback that I really want here. But I also need a running back 3 that I might be able to depend on, and there's only really one starting running back left on the board. So I'm going to go with James Conner here. It's not a pick that I like. It's a pick that I really hate that I've been trying to avoid. But at this point, I really need to make sure that I have a third running back on my team. And thankfully, the quarterback that I really wanted to come back around to me is still here. So I'm in a position where Matthew Stafford's there, Ryan Tannehill's there, Jalen Hurts is there. I do lean towards Tannehill, and I'm going to explain why in a second after I draft him. So Ryan Tannehill has been a dominant quarterback since he's taken over as the head quarterback of the Titans. He has AJ Brown, Julio Jones is new, Derrick Henry. So he has this ultimate offense where they can't just focus in on one weapon and shut them down. As well, they have a terrible defense, which means they're going to have to consistently score points, which means it's going to be on Ryan Tannehill to get you a ton of fantasy points by scoring touchdowns, having a lot of passing yards, and he's really sneaky. Because if the defense tries to focus in on Derrick Henry, he can easily do a play-action pass or play-action run or even just a fake where it looks like it's going to Derrick Henry and then Ryan Tannehill takes off for an 8-yard touchdown and gets you a rushing touchdown on his feet. Now we're here in the 12th round. A lot of teams might be looking at defenses or kickers right now. I typically save that for the end. I want to get the best positional picks that I can. So on the board, we still have a lot of talented wide receivers left. We're looking at Curtis Samuel, who's dealing with an injury. Mike Williams, who's also dealing with an injury. Michael Gallup, Mooney, Elijah Moore, also dealing with an injury. So basically, you're looking at breakout wide receivers, or you could be looking at defense. You could be looking at your backup quarterback. If you do like taking a backup quarterback in leagues, I'm definitely someone who doesn't like taking a backup quarterback in fantasy drafts because it's just another person on your roster that you feel like you can't cut. But it's also a position that you can't even pick someone up and put them on your bench because you've got that quarterback in the way. So I've got some deep shots that I'll take with my last pick. So I'll take the defense here. I'll start the defensive run. Right now, the Buccaneers have all 22 starters returning. They have the fourth easiest schedule right now, so I'll take the Buccaneers defense here as the first defense off the board. And as we're going to see, we saw Mike Williams, the Washington football team's defense go, the Rams go. Hardman, another breakout potential. I just don't see it. He's had the opportunity to break out before. And the Chiefs offense early goes Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, and then it's who's going to have the best game as a third target in the offense. Hunter Henry go. Hunter Henry's currently dealing with an injury. Curtis Samuel, now it's back to me. So there are a bunch of guys that I could be taking here. I've got 2 positional picks left. There's a handful of wide receivers that I do really like. If Amari Cooper is dealing with more of an injury, if he re-aggravates his ankle injury and is out, Michael Gallup would be a great pickup right here because the Cowboys offense, it's still going to be very great. It's going to be great. It's going to be very intensive because their defense is still terrible, even though they've tried to improve it, which means the Cowboys will have to score a lot of points to win games, which is great for fantasy players. So Michael Gallup could be a pick here. But someone that everyone is sleeping on, and I don't know why, he's being drafted as like the wide receiver 37 or wide receiver 40, but finished as a top 36 wide receiver last year. Julio Jones is gone. Everyone thinks Kyle Pitts is going to soak up all those targets, but Russell Gage still had a great year last year, being third on the depth chart. He's only going to see more work, so I love taking Russell Gage at the end of drafts. And there's other guys like Cole Beasley, who's a great full PPR guy to take. You could take the breakout potential of Henry Ruggs. You could go Marvin Jones, hoping that he connects with Trevor Lawrence. And these are just guys you're taking shots on at this point. And I think my last positional pick, I'm going to be going with a running back just because my running back position is just so weak right now with the way the draft has landed. So I'm looking at Gus Edwards, Tony Pollard as a handcuff. I don't really like taking handcuffs. Jamal Williams, Philip Lindsay, J.D. McKissick, Gainwell, Latavius Murray, Alexander Madison. These guys are all handcuffs to the major players. So I think in this position, the guy that might be getting the most points off the bat, it could be Philip Lindsay at the moment, just because he's now listed as the number one running back in Houston. So I'll take Philip Lindsay as my last positional pick. I don't love this pick. I personally am not super thrilled with how this draft went. But with a full PPR, 2 flex, this is a sort of situation where you need to take the best player available. In the way my draft went, that's kind of the way I had to, because there are so many talented wide receivers that are going to get a lot of receiving work, a lot of receptions, where that's super valuable in full PPR. So you need to take the guy who's going to help your team the most. If you already have 2 guys in the positions that you're not going to be focusing on, then you might be all right. So with my last pick, I'm going to have to take a kicker. Kicker's on the board at this one, Younghoe Koo. The Falcons offense might be talented enough this year to get over the 50. but they might not be talented enough to score it, and they always play indoors, which should be good. Jason Sanders, I'll take him. Last year, the Dolphins had Jason Sanders finish as the number one fantasy kicker because they were talented enough to get over the 50, but not talented enough to score touchdowns, which makes that kicker valuable. Then you also got guys who are just always up there, like Justin Tucker, Harrison Butker, Tyler Bass might have a good year because the Bills' offense is really good. So you just have to pick the kicker that you really want to go with. Now, as my last pick on the board, I can only go with anyone at the moment. So I'll talk about the tight end that I had mentioned at the top of the show that I really want to walk away with if I go light tight end strategy. That's Adam Troutman. And this is because Michael Thomas is injured. Traquan Smith is now dealing with an injury. So the number one receiving target that was on the team last year is actually Adam Troutman because they've tried to sign some guys in the offseason. They've signed Chris Hogan, who was irrelevant last year. They signed Kevin White, who's been irrelevant his entire career. So Adam Troutman could be the number one target in New Orleans. So I love walking away with him if I don't have a tight end. Or I'll take him as my last flyer pick just to see if he actually does break out. I'd love to have him as an insurance policy if my high early round tight end doesn't actually pan out or gets injured. Adam Troutman is the perfect end of draft guy to take in whatever league format you're in. If you're in an 8-team league, you might just leave him on waivers because there's so many talented tight ends on the board that you just need to keep your eye on him if something does break out. But this just kind of wraps up the whole draft today. Really quick, really fast. Sorry about that. We're just in the middle of a moving parts kind of system where I'm moving, Brian's moving, John's moving. It's just different days, different weeks. The podcast might be switching to a Zoom format where we're all going to be podcasting from our separate locations. But if you have any questions or comments about this draft today, if you have anything you want to talk about, leave it down below. We'd love to help you with any questions that you have before the season starts. And we might be going to 2 episodes a week. We might be doing a giant episode a week. We're still going to figure all that out before the season starts because we're starting in about 2 to 3 weeks now. So we got a lot of drafts coming up. We got your drafts coming up that you're going to try to prepare for. We've done a few drafts already. We've done 2 this month before this episode. We've done a few once a month going back. So there's multiple episodes that you could watch or listen to if you really want to go back and try to figure out how you might want to draft depending on what your draft is. But as always, cheers.